Yeah, but you know, it's like what happens to me every once in a while, where without permission, I throw some things out at home, and I say, "There's no way that anybody will ever notice this. No one has touched it. It has patina on it." You know, at this point, sure enough, somewhere in the cosmos, right? If my wife or my children, they know, you know, and in the end, that's kind of all you can do, right? It's what a wonderful gift. Yes, I know. I'm sure, and it's entirely possible that that will be the case. So, all right, for you, and then thank you. You know, to our throngs. Although, frankly, we've tripled our numbers from the last couple of years, so that's a good sign. You know that works for me. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, I promise I won't keep you in. You know what he did? He didn't. Yes, that's so. Look, Judy. I would be the last person who will tell you not to be checking it as you go. I mean, we have got good internet. You know, the truth is, we had some of our best participation ever this year at a Yoma's food party, and what happened was there was a Knicks playoff game, and I wheeled the television in here and I put it on for all the parents and the kids, and it turned out to be a great thing. So I was thinking about it. It's like you could do a Sunday football day. You know, put the big TV.
It was like just people did it was self-created at CBST, and we sometimes watch. Everybody's got different teams.
Yes, 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 of
And
course, right.
sometimes we watch baseball game pictures, which you can see.
Sure.
And then sometimes we'll watch when it's the Mets and the Yankees. They'll watch the.
See, I think that's great. I think
And
that's
then we
great.
have this, and the intern was a Yankee fan.
So there you go. You have somebody to boo.
Yeah.
Well, the truth is that, when Mordecai Kaplan, amongst his many geniuses, right, his idea of what really the original Jewish center concept was, right, is that it's a place not just where you go to daven, but you've got a swimming pool, you've got a gym, the J. Right, so the JCCs in general, but like the original Jewish center on the Upper West Side on 86th Street, it's still there. It still has its pool. That's how, when I grew up, that's one of the places that I ended up going swimming. And in those days, it was also in the time where we were promoting to go to the country clubs and what have you, and that started a whole movement, right? All those synagogues up and down the island, up and down the coast, that started expanding, building their own dining halls, all that kind of stuff. And the problem was they built it, right? It was a boom period, and then all of those shuls basically were the first to implode the moment that you could go and rent, here, or go to that country club or whatever it was, exactly, because nobody ever thinks about overhead when it comes to a synagogue, but you do, right? But if you think about like one of those places mid island that you've been to, right, as a giant catering hall or a giant sanctuary, right, to heat and to cool that space, to maintain it, all those things, by the end of 10 years of diminishing numbers, doesn't matter who you are, right? It starts to go. And my grandparents' shul in Ohio was one of these ones, and Youngstown, or suburb of Youngstown, I should say, birthplace of the ignition bomb. It was the bomb where you turn the car on and it explodes. It had a huge mafia presence. One year, one year, they were downstairs in the basement of my great aunt and uncle. My grandfather and his brothers had a plastics company, and they found cases of Johnny Walker Red, and nobody could figure it out because they weren't really big drinkers. If they ever had a drink, it wasn't Johnny Walker Red. Turns out it was Christmas time, right, to hand out to the cops and to hand out to the mob, and they basically paid off all these guys. There was a very famous guy. I don't know if it ever made the news anywhere outside of Ohio. This guy named Jim Trafficant. He was a Democrat, but he was one of the most corrupt politicians you'll ever meet in the world. He was like a forerunner of the man who should not be named, and it's just a fascinating place. And in its day, it had a huge, well, for a Rust Belt city, it had a huge Jewish population. They had a kosher butcher, everything. And but by the time I was born, it was already starting to kind of go on a decline. And my mom's family was probably the last family keeping it going, and eventually it merged with the north side where the Jews had moved. Reading, Pennsylvania is a perfect example. Reading is a perfect example. Huge. And in its day, it was filled, filled. Right, that space was filled. On Shabbos was filled. Yeah, probably long. Right, it's oh, tons.
Limbrook and Rockville Center merged.
Yeah.
My shul,
Oh, for sure.
Limbrook came to Rockville
I
Center.
grew up in Highland Park Conservative Temple. That, my parents went to Northwell Shul, but they didn't have Hebrew school.
Right. It's for girls. Yeah.
So I
Right.
went to Highland Park, and that's still very big. Highland Park became very Orthodox.
Right. So but that actually ends up being a bunch of the change. Look, my grandfather's shul in Forest Hills or Rego Park is Bukharian now. Yeah. But otherwise, basically, the original concept of whatever it was long gone. I don't know what happened with my great grandfather's shul in Atlanta, but as far as I know, it's still there. As far as I know, it's still Orthodox and all of that. But 100 odd years later.
Where are they from?
Yeah, exactly. So originally he was from Kovna, Lithuania, and they started out, I think, in Canton. Actually, he went as a visiting rabbi once, and they hired him on the spot, and he worked there for a couple of years, and then he got this pulled down to Atlanta, which was a much bigger.
You came here.
Well, a certain amount of years, but look, I always say this, and I don't mean this in a self-deprecating way. I just acknowledging who he was. He had more, Torah knowledge in a pinky, right, than I will have in 10 lifetimes. It's just who he was and all of that. And the other interesting story of the Gaffins of Atlanta is that my grandfather and I think 3 or 4 of the 8 siblings were the first Jews to go to Emory. And my great grandfather, he didn't speak any English as far as I know. He only spoke Yiddish, but he somehow became friendly with Emory. I think is I forget if it's Jesuit or Methodist or its original idea is something tied to Christianity in some form or the other. And he negotiated a deal because they had classes on Saturdays. So my family were able to, by my great grandfather's permission, were able to walk to class, but they never had to take notes and they never took a test. So they would just sit there and they would listen and they would learn and all that. And so when I was down in the South for the civil rights trip that we did last year, I took one extra day and I went. So there's a whole section of the rare book room that is just materials of the Geffen family. And I went and sat there. I only had like an hour and a half to do this. And they literally bringing this stuff out with, white gloves on. And I'm thinking, this is nuts. But I was reading it in their household. They made their own newsletter. So my grandfather, writing as a kid, they're reporting on what's happening within the house. It's the most wonderful thing in the world to me. But I was sitting there thinking, I was like, what the heck is this doing here? Like, why would anybody find this of interest? And they explained to me that there are scholars who study Southern Jewish history. And it's a very interesting history, right? And that's sort of, especially that time period, right? 20s, 30s, things like that. All sorts of interesting stuff. And my great-grandfather's notes are also, some of them are in the Center for Jewish History in the American Jewish Archives, especially because of the Coca-Cola thing, because that ends up being, an interesting piece of Americana, as it were. Yes, quick, please. Yeah.
But I think it was somewhere South Carolina. But was Sam Levinson, was he Southerner?
No.
Then there was I've been trying to find.
Well, there is actually something it's called the Institute for Southern Jewry or the Study of Southern Jewry or something like that. I had a classmate of mine who actually worked for a few years. It unfortunately doesn't have a lot of traction in a lot of cases. Yeah, no, well, that's interesting though. It's very interesting. Well, try ChatGPT. You never know. It might do something more these days than anything else. All right, so we thought we would begin with Havdalah, which I realize you guys don't have in front of you. There are a couple.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. I know they're downstairs. He has them in a push cart, but let me know if there aren't enough because I think we have the benchers next door. We can probably use the benchers for that. Yeah.
He left some Siddur in here.
Oh, you know what? We can test out finally. I don't think it works. I don't think it works the way I intended it because we need to get a good. Yes. Machine. Oh, look, it does work. It's not quite what I was hoping for. But I asked them to put little floodlights behind these windows to see if we could get. Doesn't quite do it. Hey, Jim. Well, it's a nice idea. Nice idea. Here, give me a second. Yes, you got. Okay. All right. Now that's Jerry. Ever the optimist. I feel like this is deja vu. I feel like there was another time where you came in and said the same thing. We'll see. I mean, it is streaming for whatever it's worth, so you never know. There's, I know, yeah. 610. Yes, exactly. You can only see like to the front row. It's the advantage of it. It's 610. 610. Oh, good to know. Good to know. Good to know. Okay. All right, page 610. הנה אל ישועתי אבטח ולא פחד, כי הזי בזמרת ידוני ויהי לי לישועה, ושפתם המים בששון ממעייני הישועה, לאדוני ישועה על עמך ברכתך סלע, אדוני צבאות עמנו משכב לנו אל יעקב סלע, אדוני צבאות אשרי אדם בוטח בך, אדוני הושיע המלך יעננו ביום קוראנו, ליהודים הייתה אור בשמחה בששון ועיקר, כן תהיה לנו. כוס ישועות אשא ובשם אדוני אקרא. יאי לי לה 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 לה, יאי לי לה 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 לה, יא לה 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 לה, יא לה 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 יא לה לה. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן, בורא פרי הגפן. יאי לי לה 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 לה, יאי לי לה 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 לה, יא לה 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 לה, יא לה 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 יא לה לה. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא מיני בשמים, בורא מיני בשמים. Judy, could you pass this around? Sorry, it's a teabag is what we have at the moment. Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 ya la la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 ya la la. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei meorei haesh, borei meorei haesh. Yai lai la 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 la, yai lai la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 ya la la. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamavdil ben kodesh lechol, ben or lechoshech, ben Yisrael le'amim, ben yom hashvi'i לששת ימי המעשה. ברוך אתה אדוני המבדיל בין קודש לחול. יאי לי לה 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 לה, יאי לי לה 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 לה, יאי לה 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 לה, יאי לה 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 יאי לה לה. המבדיל בין קודש לחול, חטאותינו ימחול, זרענו וכספנו יבע בכחול, וככוכבים בלילה. זרענו וכספנו יבע בכחול, וככוכבים בלילה. שבוע טוב, 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 שבוע טוב. A good week, a week of peace. May gladness reign and joy increase. A good week, a week of peace. May gladness reign and joy increase. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishmi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Bimera ve'yameinu, Yahavo Eleinu, Imashiach ben David, Imashiach ben David, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Atishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi. Jerry, did you get these? Okay. Everybody have a, okay, should be a sheet and then a booklet. All right. Shavua Tov, everyone. Shavua Tov. Okay, so just a quick teaching before we do Slichot. You know, if nothing else, to make this feel a little more substantial, but also I think important to understand that what are called the Shlosh Esrei Midot, or the 13 attributes, are kind of at the very essence, the very essential core of the Slichot service in particular, and then become a focus throughout the holidays. I should point out from the outset that we do one thing that goes a little bit against tradition here, which is not actually from me. It was even from Rabbi Morris's advice. There are a number of things that traditionally are not done when a Chag intersects with Shabbat. Okay, and generally speaking, they fall into the category of things that are petitionary, in which we're asking God for something beyond what we are already getting, which is the gift of either Shabbat or the Chag or whatever it is. So things like, for example, iconic pieces of liturgy like Avinu Malkeinu traditionally are not done when Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. They end up falling on a Shabbat. Technically, you're not supposed to blow shofar if it ends up being on Shabbat. That's for a different reason. That's for the carrying reason, other things, other mishigas. But the 13 attributes are another one of those things, because inherent to them, we are asking for what? What's the core idea? Yes, and also another piece of it too, which is forgiveness, right? So sort of a strange thing when you think about it. Can you imagine going all the way through Yom Kippur, right, and not asking God for forgiveness? It doesn't quite compute, and we're not going to get into the minutia of it, but for us here, it's core, and we do it actually in it is a later development that it was even included on the Shalosh Regalim, the 3 festivals of Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuot, that when we take the Torah out of the ark, those that may remember our services during those parts of the year, we open the ark before we take the Torah out, and we offer these 13 attributes. So we do it 3 times, we repeat them over and over again. So the original place in which this appears, does anybody remember? It's if we're looking at the top of the page where it's Exodus 34, and I apologize for everybody who's watching online if I had realized I would have sent this out somehow or another. But if you're following at home, it's Exodus 34, verses 6 and 7. Okay, this is the part of our liturgy that's the most familiar, right? We say, and forgive me for every place where it says, Lord, Adonai passed before him and proclaimed, Adonai, Adonai, a God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. Yet God does not remit all punishment, but visits the iniquity of parents upon children and children's children upon the 3rd and 4th generations. Okay, so what is the story where this appears in the Exodus narrative? Does anybody remember? It immediately follows a very significant moment of failure, if that narrows it down at all. I know, it's such a long list of failures, right? It's hard to remember which one of the all, right? It's right after the golden calf. Okay, so that, you know, of course, and the golden calf represents a lot of problematic things, but one is its sort of immediacy connection to the giving of the 10 Commandments, right? It's sort of that happens, and then this happens shortly after. So it's sort of an immediate disaster in need of something really significant to come back. So we then see that this same idea, in a slightly different formulation, finds its way also into Prophet Micha, which is obviously of a later book. And does anybody remember where this section of Micha appears in our liturgy, by any chance? Or our high holiday experience? It probably would have helped, actually, if I reversed these 2 things. Well, so Micha actually is after you read the book of Jonah, and it concludes on Yom Kippur, there is a section of Micha that is included as a sort of coda, as a last piece, right? It says, Mi el kamocha, who is a God like you, forgiving iniquity, remitting transgression, who has not maintained his wrath forever against the remnant of his own people, because God loves graciousness. God will take us back in love. God will cover up our iniquities. God will hurl all our sins into the depths of the sea. Does that sound like it reminds you of any ritual act we do during the holidays? Tashlich, right? So there's also a big piece that factors in there. This is Tashlich has an interesting history of its own right, but it's certainly one of its main influences is this text here. And you will keep faith with Jacob, loyalty to Abraham, as you promised on oath to our fathers in days gone by. So obviously not exact word for word of the previous, right? But picking up on a lot of the same elements, right? God as a forgiving God remembering us, and ultimately speaking, connecting to the original covenants. Interesting that it goes to Jacob and then backwards to Abraham, right? Usually it's the other way around. And then, of course, in Jonah, we get another example of this, right? He prayed to Adonai, saying, "Oh, Adonai, isn't this just what I said when I was still in my own country? That is why I fled beforehand to Tarshish, for I know that you are a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in kindness, renouncing punishment." Right? So here, this, of course, is Jonah's unique sort of cynicism. He gets upset at the end of the story because God actually does what God is meant to do, right? To forgive the people who actually turn away from their misdeeds and repent. And then Jonah gets upset. He's like, "Well, what did you need me for? I was telling you I didn't need to do this in the first place, right? You're so compassionate. What did you need me to do this? All this stuff." So here's a section of Masachet Rosh Hashanah, which I don't know if any of you have ever studied before, but it pulls in a little bit of something and it adds another sort of interesting layer here. Okay, the verse states that Adonai passed before him and proclaimed. So here, quoting back from Exodus. Okay, and then it's lagamre, that sort of quotes to the end of the phrase. Now, Rabbi Yochanan said, were it not explicitly written in the verse, it would be impossible to say this. What is it? There's a concern about anthropomorphism here, right? That God is passing before, God is proclaiming, right? There is a certain amount in that narrative that describes God to some degree in human terms. The idea that God is a physical form or any of those kinds of things. So without certain elements, right, it would have been impossible to say this because it would have been insulting to God's honor. Okay, so what is this verse about? It teaches that the Holy One, blessed be He, wrapped himself in a talit like a prayer leader and showed Moses the structure of the order of the prayer. Okay, so this is one of the origin texts that the rabbis use to establish the tefillah that we are most familiar with. Okay, it basically says that when this experience is happening with Moses, God literally puts on a tallis like I'm wearing and becomes the shaliach tzibor and teaches Moses for the first time what to do in a situation where the people have sinned. And what do? Right? Wrap yourself in this talit, and God says to him, whenever the Jewish people sin, let them act before me in accordance with this order. Let the prayer leader wrap himself in a prayer shawl and publicly recite the 13 attributes of mercy, and I will forgive them. Okay? So while we may sort of, and look, I will be the first one to say this. I'm the one up here, it canters up here. By the end of Yom Kippur, we will have done the Shlosh Esrei Midot over and over and over again to the point in which it is almost droning, right? We start to look at it as almost doing the opposite of what it's intended to do, right? It feels, punishing to some degree. But what is it actually? Its very essence is that it's the first example of our tradition giving us a means by which to pray to God, right? Not sacrifices, not the other system that we're familiar with, but to use prayer as the main means by which to seek forgiveness from God. So in essence, it's the ortex, it's the beginning point of what we now basically associate with the Judaism that we all know and love, right? Reform, Orthodox, Conservative, Reconstructionist, whatever you are, all of us are built around tefillah as a central tenet of who we are and what we do, and our prayer services are core to it. But one of its main functions is to give us an opportunity, especially at certain places and times of the year, to invoke this very particular, almost as if we are reminding God of God's commitment to this forgiveness. Right? It's such a funny thing, right? Again, almost a certain amount of hubris, right, to suggest that God needs to be reminded of anything. But to some degree, right, it's for us. It's to make us feel like, when we feel forgotten, or when we feel like the things we've done are so bad they can never be forgiven. Here is a formula. Here is a structure. Here is a means by which to do this. Okay, and then it continues a little bit. The verse continues, Adonai, Adonai, and it asks, basically inherent in this, a question. Why does it repeat Adonai twice? It should be understood as follows. I am God before a person sins, and I am God after a person sins and performs repentance. As God does not recall from him his first sins, since God is always God who is merciful and gracious and so on, right? So we get sort of layers of this again to suggest that, we may feel like we can't ever move forward after we do the terrible thing that we have done. We can't be forgiven for whatever it may be, but God is us to us before the sin, and God is us to us after the sin, so long as we are open hearted, so long as we invoke God's mercy and compassion, there is always the potential of sort of coming back. So, as a last thing, and this we don't have to go through necessarily word for word, but I just thought it might be interesting. Like a lot of other things, like the Ten Commandments, frankly, if you open up the book and say, okay, it's very easy to see, they're listed in bullet point order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Not so. It's actually sometimes complicated to figure out where does one begin and where does one end. So, here is a way of breaking down in that set of verses in the Hebrew what each one of these things are and what each one of these things means. And it's, again, we might think in simple terms, right? Forgiveness is forgiveness, but actually it's a multifaceted concept, right? Compassion is not always exactly the same thing as forgiveness, right? They can exist in some cases on their own, but they are most powerful when brought together. So that sort of whole image of the 13 attributes is really what gives a structure to the Slichot services, whether you're observing them again as an Ashkenazi Jew, which is a more somewhat limited function, right, happening on a particular night into the morning, or Sephardic Jews who do it again for the entire month of Elul for 40 days leading all the way through Yom Kippur. In either case, the idea of it is that you are sort of slowly building a repertoire of liturgy that helps to unlock both within ourselves and we believe ultimately with God, right? The gates open up, as it were, right? That's the image of Sharei Tzedek, right? Of opening the sort of gates of righteousness, the gates of compassion. All of these sort of mental images that we use are actually really very helpful in helping us to not get locked into what is a very understandable challenge of the holidays, which is the sort of roteness or the repetitiveness of it, which sometimes can feel kind of, as I said, distancing rather than something that brings us closer. And I think that increasingly that's partially because we leave it in too simplistic terms. We have to sort of really push ourselves to study some of the texts that help to bring it out. And I hope that this, for you during any point of the holidays will bring some sense of that in some meaningful kind of way. So with that, I think we'll get started with our service. Any questions? Anything that was unclear? I hope it's, and you by all means take it with you if it's, yes. Mm. You know what? You know what? That's an excellent question, Margaret, and I don't have an answer for it. It's the first time, honestly, that I've really paid attention to it. Also, it was the first thing I thought that's what I need to go find out when I sit down. It is really bizarre. I mean, Isaac does have a tendency to get left out, unfortunately, of a lot of these things. Kind of his nature in some ways as to who he was. But, and I think Jacob gets elevated to some degree because he becomes associated with Israel and is used interchangeably with that. And, in truth, again, our sort of parental lineage becomes much more expanded by the children of Jacob than anything else. It's sort of 1 to 1 to 1 up until that point, and then it explodes outward. But nonetheless, it does feel odd. Most of the time when the patriarchs are invoked, they are invoked together. And most of the time, Abraham first and then on. So, I don't know. But Micha is actually, Micha and Amos are my two favorite of the prophets. I'm not unique in that sense. But so I wanted to just to try one new piyut, which is not in front of you, but it has a refrain. And I want to teach you. I'll do the heavy lifting part. But we'll see, actually, and I don't know whether it'll jog any memories, Howard, from your times at B'nai Jeshurun, but this comes from the Sephardi tradition, and it's part of the reason why I wanted to bring at least one thing that came from that place. So I'm going to just sing the first part for a second, and I'll teach you where you guys come in. The words in Hebrew are Chatanu lefanecha, rachem aleinu. Okay, Chatanu lefanecha, we have sinned before you, rachem aleinu, be compassionate to us. So it goes like this. Adon haselichot, Bochen levavot, gole amukot, dover tzedakot. And this is where you'd come in. Chatanu lefanecha, rachem aleinu. Chatanu lefanecha, rachem aleinu. Hadur beniflaot, vatik benechamot, zoche berhit avot, chokek elayot, chatanu lefanecha, rachem aleinu, chatanu lefanecha, rachem aleinu. Tov umetiv labriot, yodea kol nistarot, koves abonot, lovesh tzedakot, chatanu lefanecha, rachem aleinu, chatanu lefanecha, rachem aleinu. Ma'ale zakiot, norat yehilot, soleach avonot, one betzarot, chatanu lefanecha, rachem aleinu, chatanu lefanecha, rachem aleinu. Poel Yeshuot, Tzofer Atidot, Kore Hadorot, Rochev Aravot, Chatanu lefanecha, rachem aleinu, chatanu lefanecha, rachem aleinu. And you can hear even in the melody itself, right? Even if I hadn't told you that it was Sephardic, it probably would have stood out a little bit differently than the norm, as it were. And just a reminder to us again of to break out of our Ashkenaz-centric view of things, because some of the most beautiful, most wonderful melodies that we have ultimately come from that very different tradition. Okay, so now we'll go to our packets. We're going to go to page 1, and we'll start with some of the traditional pieces. Here, the first is the 121st Psalm, our section of the 121st Psalm, Esainai. And, as always, if you know anything and you can sing along with me, always great. And if not, this is a contemplative service. So use this time in the way that feels most, meaningful to you. And really the main idea, again, is to focus on 2 elements, right? Forgiveness, right? Or asking for forgiveness and being forgiven. Those 2 elements of both sides, right? Both in our relationship to God and also our relationship to ourselves and to others. Esainai eleharim, me'ayin yavo ezri. Esainai eleharim, me'ayin yavo ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai, ose shamayim v'aretz. Ezri me'im Adonai, ose shamayim v'aretz. Now we turn to Ashrei at the very bottom of the page, just the opening and closing pieces. Ashrei Yoshrei Veitecha, Odi Hallelujah, Odi Hallelujah. Ashrei Yoshrei Veitecha, Odi Hallelujah, Odi Hallelujah. Selam. V'anaha Me'ata ve'ad olam, Me'ata ve'ad olam, Hallelujah. 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 And now we'll turn to page 2 and we'll rise in body or in spirit for the Chatzi Gadish, which has a bit of a different melody, which I will hope that I can remember. But Yitkadal ve'yitkadash Shemei Rabba Be'alma divrach irutei Ve'am lehich malchutei Bechayechon uvyomechon Uvechayei dechol Beit Yisrael Bagala uvizman kariv veimeru Amen. Yesh me'raba mevarach le'alam u'le'alme almayam Yitbarach, Yitbarach, Ve'yishtabach, Ve'yitpa'ar, Ve'yitromaham, Ve'yitnasem, Ve'yitahadar, Ve'yitaleh, Veitalal Shemei Dekucha Brichu Leila Uleila Mikol Birchata Veshirata Tushmechata Benechemata Tamirhan Ve'almaha Ve'imeru Amen. Okay, please be seated. We'll turn now to page 3, and we'll read together in English. This will be the first of the 3 sets of the 13 attributes that we will do at the bottom of the page, with some introductory pieces as well. The middle of the page is a piyut, which I will chant. Let's read together again in English toward the top of the page. God of forgiveness, we come before you in need of compassion. At Sinai, you spoke words that guide our lives to this day. But our ancestors lost faith in you, lost hope in their Redeemer. With one voice, they had promised, we will do and obey, and yet, stiff-necked, they broke their word, adoring an idol of gold. How wondrous your compassion in the face of their rebellion, your forgiveness in that moment of human weakness and doubt. We too have broken promises to you. We too worship the work of our own hands. We too make of gold a god. And we too forsake your word. At Sinai you revealed 13 attributes of mercy. These aspects of your nature, your very essence, we now recall. El melech yoshev al kiseh rachamim, מתנהג בחסידות, מוחל עוונות עמו, מבהיר ראשון ראשון, מרבה מחילה לחטאים, וסליחה לפושעים, עושה צדקות עם כל בשר ורוח, לא חרתם תימו. אל הורית לנו לומר 13, זכור לנו היום ברית 13, כמו שהודעת לנו מקדם, כמו שכתוב, Vayered Adonai be'anan, vayitchatze b'imo sham. Vayikra b'shem Adonai, vayavor Adonai al panav vayikra. Adonai, Adonai, el rachum v'chanun, erech apayim v'rav chesed v'emet, notzer chesed lehalafim, nose avon v'afesha, v'chata ben hakem. We'll turn now to page 4 as we prepare for the second recitation. We'll read together in English toward the top of the page and a little bit of Hebrew interspersed with. In all your ways be aware of God, for there is no sovereign without a people. Ein melech below am. We are the chariot on which God's glory rides, for there is no sovereign without a people. Let the love of God be spread through our deeds, for there is no sovereign without a people. You are my servant, Israel. I will be glorified through you, for there is no sovereign without a people. Where is God? Anywhere we let God in, for there is no sovereign without a people. Ein melech below am. Eternal God, you revealed to Moses your 13 attributes of mercy. They exist in the world through our awareness. They transform the world through our actions. We speak them now as prayer and aspiration. Adonai, Adonai, el rachum v'chanun, erech apayim, v'rav chesed v'emet, notzer chesed lahalafim, nose avon v'afesha, v'chata v'nahakem. We turn to page 5 now for the third recitation. Luech tzeh fanav belivi vaita. If I could see God's face within my heart, I'd see the face of a gardener, compassionate to weed and flower alike, patiently pruning, graciously planting, loving the endless hours of tending and nurturing the earth, seeds, roots, all that grows, and true to the essence of the gardener's work, forgiving the fallen branches, the withered petals, the cracked stones, the broken stems. Luech tzeh fanav belivi vaita. If I could see God's face within my heart, I'd see the human face in 1,000 acts of mercy. The one who gives bread to the hungry and shelters the lost, who hears the voice of grief and makes room for the stranger, who brings relief to the blind, the bent, the unjustly imprisoned, and is true to the essence of holy work, defying evil, healing brokenness, easing pain, and in the end, forgiving ourselves as God forgives us. Adonai, Adonai, el rachum echanun, erech apayim, v'rav chesed v'emet, notzer chesed lahalafim, nose avon v'afesha, v'chata v'nahakem. We'll turn now to page 6, another key component of the Vidui section of Yom Kippur, of the confessional section. Shema Kolenu at the beginning. This is a different melody than our cantors generally do here. It's the one I grew up with at B'nai Jeshurun. And then the bottom of the page, Al Tash Lichenu, this is a melody from Basia Schechter, who was at the time when I was a kid, the musical director alongside Cantor Priven at BJ. And she created this melody. I still remember the first time she did it. It was amazing. And I'll try to teach you at least the Yailalai part when we get down there. So the very beginning of the page for Shema Kolenu. Shema Kolenu Adonai Eloheinu Usverachem Aleinu V'kabel berachamim וברצון את תפילתנו. השיבנו אדוני אליך, ונשובה. חדש ימינו כקדם, שמע קולנו, אדוני אלוהינו, חוס ורחם עלינו, וקבל ברחמים וברצון את תפילתנו. השיבנו אדוני אליך, ונשובה. חדש ימינו כקדם. Hear our call, Adonai, our God, show us compassion. Accept our prayer with love and goodwill. Take us back, Adonai, let us come back to you. Renew our days as in the past. Hear our words, Adonai, understand our unspoken thoughts. May the speech of our mouths and our hearts' quiet prayer be acceptable to you, Adonai, our rock and our Redeemer. Do not cast us away from your presence or cut us off from your Holy Spirit. Do not cast us away when we are old, as our strength diminishes. Do not forsake us. Do not forsake us, Adonai. Be not far from us, our God. With hope, Adonai, we await you. Surely you, Adonai, our God, you will answer. So here is the lie part, at least at the beginning. It goes like this. Yai, lie, 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 lie. Yai, lie, 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 lie. Yai, lie, 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 lie. Yai, lie, 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 lie. Al tashlichenu milfanecha, yai, lie, lie, veruach kodshecha, al tikach mimenu, ai, lie, al tashlichenu leit zikna, ai, kichlot kochenu, al tazvenu, ai, al tashlichenu leit zikna, ai, kichlot kochenu, al tazvenu, ai, al tazvenu, Adonai Eloheinu, ai, al tirchak mimenu. Oh, I think that is right. I think that's right. Oh, wow, I never knew that, but I think you're absolutely correct. Yeah, really remarkable. She, I think, for most of the last decade is at Romamu. Yeah, I think is I don't know if she's still there, but amazing talent. You have to imagine that when she did it the first time, it's also with basically a full band, string quartet, the oud, the whole thing, the drum Shoshana on the drums, the whole thing. So it really is a very powerful piece. I've always loved that one. I'm actually kind of amazed that I made it through without tearing up. So we're going to turn to page 7 now. We'll read together in English at the top of the page, and then for this we'll rise and body our spirit for our first real vidui of the holiday season, which we'll do at the very bottom. Our God and God of all generations, may our prayers reach your presence, and when we turn to you, do not be indifferent. Eternal One, our God and God of our ancestors, we do not say to you in arrogance and stubbornness, we are blameless and do no wrong. In truth, we and our forebears have stumbled. We have fallen. And so we'll rise in body or spirit for the vidui at the very bottom of the page. Ashamnu Baganu Gazalnu Dibanu Dofi Hevinu Vehirshanu Zanu Chamasnu Tafalnu Sheker Yatsnura Kizavnu Latsnu Maranu Niatsnu Sararnu Avinu Pashanu Tsararnu Kishinu Oref Rashanu Shichatnu Tiavnu Tainu Titanu. Okay, please be seated. We're almost at our very conclusion. On page 8, so this is always a sweet memory for me. So my first Slichot service here, in which to describe my existence as imposter syndrome hitting me like a ton of bricks, right? My first Thai holidays, and then I woke up like 2 weeks before, and I was like, oh my God, I have no idea how to do Slichot. It's 10 years later, I can tell you that I didn't know what I was doing. So I called my brother in a panic, and I said, Jonas, is there any chance he could come out and help lead this with me? And he said, sure. So he came out. And he taught this particular piyut on page 8. The English translation's on the next page, so you'll see it. But your part in this is the refrain with the words hu ya'anenu. Okay, hu in this case is the word for God, right? Him in this case, right? And ya'anenu means God answered. So each of these is a moment in the history of our people in which there's something going on, and one of our ancestors or a group of ancestors reached out to God for an answer. And hu ya'anenu, who answers them, right? So what is, of course, the logic of this particular piyut appearing during Slichot? Okay, what are we asking, right? We're asking for forgiveness, and we hope hu ya'anenu, right, that God will ultimately respond to us. So it goes like this. I always realize that, I have pretty good vision, but this text is very small. So if I get any of the Hebrew wrong, Margaret, forgive me, we'll see how it goes. So it goes like this. Mishe'ana L'sara imenu beziknata hu ya'anenu mishe'ana l'Avraham Avinu v'har hamoria hu ya'anenu mishe'ana l'Yitzchak benam shenekad al gabei hamizbeach hu ya'anenu mishe'ana l'Rivka be'heriona hu ya'anenu mishe'ana le'Yakov be'Betel hu ya'anenu mishe'ana le'Leah be'onya hu ya'anenu mishe'ana le'Rachel be'itzvona hu ya'anenu mishe'ana le'Yosef be'vetasurim hu ya'anenu mishe'ana Lamildot ha'ivriot al ha'avanim hu ya'anenu mishe'ana le'yochebed asfotayar hu ya'anenu mishe'ana lavotenu li'imotenu al yam suf Huya'anenu Mishe'anam Lemoshe Bechorev Huya'anenu Mishe'ana Lemiriam Bivara Huya'anenu Mishe'ana Le'aron B'machtam Huya'anenu Mishe'ana Livnot Tzlofchad Be'hamadan Petacho El Moed Huya'anenu Mishe'ana Leliyahu Bekol Demahama Dakaba Midbar Huya'anenu Huya'lailai Yalalailai Yalalailai Huya'anenu Yalalalai Yalalailai Yalalailai Huya'anenu. Is there anything that stands out as something surprising about that? Well, it may be not the case, and I actually have to look back and see whether this is a more modern interpretation of the older Piyut with some inclusions. But who are surprisingly well, that. But who's mentioned more in the text than we might assume? A particular gender that tends to be left out of the equation, right? Right. Right, women, right? There is a tremendous, number of significant stories, including Benot Tzlofchad, right? So, as I said, I have to look back and see. But, this also, I think I may have mentioned it last night, but it's another common structure of the Slichot prayers, the Piyutim in particular, is that they're designed to be call and response. So that the leader is doing a part and then everybody responds back to them in some form or the other. So that's why, if forever, at some point or another, Margaret, you're there for Slichot and you're in Yerushalayim, it's a great evening to bounce around to numerous places because you will see it, manifest in so many different ways. You go to the Sephardic shuls, you go to the Mizrahi shuls, you go to the Ashkenazi shuls, and you will hear, again, different melodies, different structures, different piyutim. But all of them, in some form or the other, are really trying to, first of all, keep people awake, which is an important part of it, right? It's kind of like the Seder. It goes on forever, but it has all sorts of things to keep you kind of focused in that way. And as I said, it's something that we lose a little bit as time goes by, which was that, for a long time, liturgical music was the popular music for our people. That's what they did. It wasn't the Beatles, right? Your local paitan, your local, person who did this work, or your local chazan was a rock star, right? That may have still actually been in some of, your childhoods. I know Howard, is a big fan of chazanas. In the early days of Chazanut in America, these were concerts. You'd have people coming to hear. So, it's lost a little bit with time. And a lot of this stuff is quite frankly not stuff that they teach our student cantors much of at school. So in some cases, actually, it's the only time that they ever really get this experience is when they're here. I still remember actually that first Slichot, my brother ends up hopping in a car with Dave Wesley, and they went into the city and ended up in Brooklyn somewhere and spent the whole night, going to various places. So just one last word I would say is when you go home tonight, if this was not enough for you, many congregations, CBST and otherwise, right, they begin later than we do. Most of them are streaming. So if you have the koach, you can certainly go and watch. Margaret has a big trip coming up, so I think you need rest, but we'll see. So yeah, packing. Before we conclude our service, we're going to do Achad Shalti to end it, but I just want to give us all just maybe a moment of silence. Right, Achad Shalti begins, right, if I had one question, one thing to ask of God this high holiday season, what might that be? So let's just take a moment for ourselves and we'll conclude together in a second. Achad sha'alti mehet Adonai hot avakesh. Achad sha'alti mehet Adonai hot avakesh. Shifti bebeit Adonai kol yemei chayai לחזות בנועם אדוני ולבקר בחלום לחזות בנועם אדוני ולבקר בחלום. Shana Tova to all of you. Thanks so much for being here. And for those watching at home, hope that it was meaningful to you as well. And almost exactly an hour. I kept it under an hour, which I think is good. And you're welcome if you want to keep the pamphlets. You're welcome to. If not, you can put them right back up here, and I'll put them away for next year. And yes, anything bigger. Oh yeah, actually, it's funny. Every year, I say this is the year I'm going to redo this packet because again, it was done by Amanda Kleinman years ago before this was in publication, and so she was copying out of something, and there's like lines through it. It's almost impossible to see anything. So I will do exactly that. It's very hard for me to see, and I have, I have. Not too many genetic quirks that worked out in my favor, but eyesight was something. Even my great grandfather passed away just before